For weeks, we'd been driving our herd north along the coast, pushing thousands of cattle up the trail from Texas. We were making good time, and the cattle had settled into the rhythm of the drive. But on the cattle trail, disaster can strike at any moment. It was during the third week of our journey when it happened. I was on night guard duty, circling the herd in the early morning hours. The night was unusually dark, the air thick with humidity. I'd been riding for about an hour when suddenly all hell broke loose. My friend John Officer's horse stepped into a gopher hole, sending both horse and rider sprawling to the ground. In an instant the entire herd was on its feet. 3,000 cattle, spooked by the commotion, took off running in blind terror. I was riding my horse, and as the stampeding cattle headed straight for me, I had to spur him hard to keep ahead of the panicked herd. The sound was deafening. Thousands of pounding hooves, bellowing cattle, shouts from the other cowboys. In the chaos, I could barely make out flashes from six-shooters as my fellow riders fired their guns, trying to turn the stampede. I raced along the edge of the herd, firing my own pistol into the air. We had to keep the cattle together at all costs. If the herd split up, we'd be in real trouble. I was soon joined by Priest and Officer. The three of us rode hard, trying desperately to get control of the lead cattle and turn the stampede. Our camp was about 200 yards from where the herd had been bedded down. The commotion had woken the rest of the outfit, and we knew help would be coming as soon as they could saddle up. But for now, it was just the three of us against 3,000 terrified longhorns. Priest sent Officer and me to either side while he stayed in the center, leading the herd. My job was to keep the cattle on the right from breaking away. I'd race up alongside the leaders, firing my gun and shouting to turn them back in. It was dangerous work. One wrong move, and I could be trampled to death. After what seemed like an eternity, I saw more flashes behind us. The rest of the boys had finally caught up. Our foreman reached me first, and together we raced to the left side of the herd. Now that we had more men, we tried to gradually turn the stampede. We spread out in a line, firing our guns and yelling, trying to deflect the cattle's course. For a few minutes it looked like we might succeed, but there weren't enough of us to cover the whole herd. The cattle broke through our line, and suddenly we found ourselves split up on either side of the stampede. We regrouped and tried again, circling to the front of the herd. This time we attempted to turn them more slowly on a wider arc. It seemed to be working, until we suddenly hit a mesquite thicket in the darkness. The lead cattle plowed into the thorny brush with a horrific crashing sound. There was no time to react. My horse was already in the thicket, and with stampeding cattle right behind us, the only choice was to go through. I gave my horse his head, shut my eyes, and held on for dear life as he charged through the tangle of branches. Thorns ripped at my clothes and skin. But somehow we made it through to the other side. The thicket slowed the cattle somewhat, but as they emerged, they scattered in all directions. I found myself alone in the lead of a long string of running cattle. Another rider, Joe Stallings, caught up with me. The two of us did our best to keep the lead cattle together, but we couldn't risk turning them yet, or they'd scatter even more. We rode like that for miles in the pitch-black night. Finally, the cattle began to tire. Joe and I managed to worry the leaders into a trot. Seizing our chance, we opened fire with our pistols, shooting into the ground right in front of the lead steers. It worked. They turned tail and reversed course. We kept up the pressure, turning the rest of the cattle as they came up behind. Soon we had them milling in a circle. we'd stopped the stampede, but we were miles from camp with no idea which direction we'd run. All we could do was keep the cattle milling and wait for dawn. As the sky began to lighten, a heavy fog rolled in. We still couldn't see more than a few yards in any direction. Joe and I rode through our bunch several times, breaking up the mill until the cattle settled down to graze. When the fog finally lifted, we found ourselves in totally unfamiliar country. There wasn't a landmark in sight to tell us where we were. All we knew was that we had somewhere between 600 and 700 head of cattle. The stampede had taken its toll. Joe had lost his hat, and my coat was in tatters. We were both cut and scratched from forcing our way through that mesquite thicket. But we were alive, and we still had most of our cattle. Now we just had to figure out where the hell we were and find the rest of the outfit. I left Joe with our bunch and rode out to scout. After a few miles, I cut the trail of another group of cattle. Following it, I came upon two more of our cowboys. They had about half as many cattle as we did. Two others had been with them earlier but had ridden off at dawn to search for the main herd. I sent one of the boys to bring in Joe's bunch, then rode on to see if I could locate any more of our scattered cattle. The sign left by the stampede was easy to follow. The ground was torn up as if a cavalry regiment had charged across it. From a low hill, I finally spotted a large group of cattle under the control of our foreman and two other cowboys. They had about 1,200 head, nearly half our original herd. I could also see our chuck wagon and remuda of spare horses approaching from the northwest. When I reported in to the foreman, he sent me to hurry along the wagon and horses. He and the other boys desperately needed fresh mounts after the long night's ride. I grabbed the first horse I could rope from the remuda and rushed them on to meet the main group. Our foreman wasted no time getting us all on fresh horses. He was dead set on rounding up every last one of our missing cattle. He sent me with two other riders to help bring in the bunch that the Rebel and Blades were trailing. We threw our groups together and pushed the cattle hard towards the slowly growing main herd. To our right, we could see two more of our men bringing in another bunch about 5 miles off. I'd been in the saddle for over 12 hours straight at this point, with nothing to eat or drink since the night before. But there was no rest for the weary. As soon as we turned our cattle into the main herd, the foreman ordered me out again to assist with that last bunch on the right. I rode hard to intercept them, my stomach growling and my throat parched. When I reached them, I learned that this group had somehow gotten onto the main trail and run nearly 20 miles before they were finally checked. The two cowboys with them had been drifting aimlessly since dawn, unable to get their bearings in the unfamiliar country. We finally got those last cattle pointed in the right direction and pushed them towards camp. It was mid-afternoon by the time we reached the main herd. I was ready to fall out of the saddle from exhaustion and hunger. But there was still work to be done. The outfit was in the middle of cutting out the range cattle that had gotten mixed into our herd during the stampede. Without even a chance to grab a drink of water, we jumped in to help with the cutting. Only when every last stray had been sorted out did we finally get the order to line the herd out for a count. The final tally showed we were still missing over 300 head, but we had recovered the vast majority of our scattered cattle, a near miracle considering how wildly they had run in the night. We'd been in the saddle for over 14 hours straight, but the day wasn't done yet. Our foreman gave us just enough time to wolf down some food before ordering us back out to search for those last missing steers. Priest and Blades were still out there somewhere with a bunch of cattle. The foreman and I saddled fresh horses and rode out to find them, leading 2 extra mounts. We picked up their trail and followed it at a gallop for miles. We finally encountered them, along with 2 other members of our outfit, about 20 miles from camp. They had over 330 head, more than enough to make our herd complete again. These big steers had run nearly 20 miles before being turned by an angle in a fence line. Turning that last bunch towards camp, we finally allowed ourselves to feel a sense of triumph. Against all odds, we had recovered our entire herd after one of the wildest stampedes any of us had ever seen. We didn't reach the Atascosa River and water until late that evening. After letting the cattle drink their fill, we grazed them through the last hours of daylight. That night we took every precaution against another run, choosing the best horses for night guard, picking the highest ground for bedding down the cattle. But cattle are funny that way. The most dangerous stampede is often the one you're not expecting.